The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
On behalf of RBCS and software test professionals, we welcome everyone today to this webinar on improving the testing process. I'm Rex Black, president of RBCS, a worldwide testing and quality assurance firm serving clients ranging from small startups to Fortune 20 global enterprises. In fact, I'm at one of those Fortune 20 global enterprises in an undisclosed location at this very moment. Since 1994, RBCS has delivered insight and confidence to hundreds of clients around the world. We have a team of international consultants that deliver customized training, consulting, and outsourcing services for companies that are looking to improve their test and quality assurance practices. I am the author of 10 books on software testing, and I won't bore you with all the titles, but they do include a couple new ebooks, Testing Metrics, measuring product process and project quality, and improving the testing process, a value-based approach to assessing and enhancing testing maturity. And this last book is related to today's webinar. I'm getting a strange error message here that says that our audio quality is degraded. Give me just one moment while I try to figure out why that might be happening. Let's close these. Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, apologies for that little interruption there, but now we seem to be back in the pink, as the saying goes. We are presenting this webinar in partnership with Software Test Professionals. You can check out their website at www.softwaretestpro.com. Attending today's webinar may earn you credit for QAI and ASQ recertification. You can check with QAI or ASQ to determine how to qualify. It typically involves saving the attendee email, which you'll receive after this webinar. Attendance at today's webinar definitely does earn PMI PDUs. Thank you to Linda Thorne for reviewing the materials for PDU status. Visit www.pmi.org to claim the PDUs and use code ITP100. RBCS's provider code is 2986. Remember, PDUs are available for live webinar attendance only. Without the attendee letter that you'll get later, you won't be able to prove your attendance. Before we start the presentation, some housekeeping notes. If you have any questions, feel free to submit them at any time via your webinar interface, but please note that I answer them only at the end. I will not be able to monitor the Q&A interface throughout the presentation. You don't need to ask for presentation copies. This presentation is already posted on the web at www.rbcs-us.com in the basic library, which is found on the Resources tab. By attending this webinar, you are automatically registered for a free e-learning drawing, so check your email over the next couple days and watch that spam filter. Excuse me. If you are having problems with the audio or visual components of this webinar, go to webinar support. These problems are usually related either to browser incompatibility, and the browser won't work with GoToWebinar, company firewalls, or audio settings on your PC, so I would recommend starting there. Hope you enjoy this free webinar from RBCS. We do these as a service to the software testing community because at RBCS we are a not just for-profit company. So today's presentation is on improving the testing process using the critical testing processes framework. Let's see how we can do that. Now, this is one of a number of frameworks that are available for evaluating testing processes. If you're familiar with the ISTQB program, you'll know that, for example, TMAP and TMMI and TPI Next and STEP are also out there. So the improving the testing process the critical testing processes framework that we're going to look at today is life cycle independent, and it is value focused and does not require a license for use. So you can take away the concepts from the book on which this is based, Critical Testing Processes, and the ebook, which is coming out, as I said, it's actually out as of yesterday, and use those to do assessments and even consulting if you like, and there is no license payable on that, unlike some of the other frameworks. So we're going to take a look at a few selected areas within the framework. We don't have time to review the entire framework in the space of an hour, but we'll look at some of the selected areas and just give you a sense of how the framework would work, and if you were to decide, hey, I'd like to pick up a copy of the Critical Testing Processes book and look at the framework in the ebook and so forth, and make it stab at doing this. How would I go about doing that? So this will give you some idea on how to do that. Okay, first off, we say a critical testing process. What is a critical testing process? So to start with a process, I'm talking about some sort of sequence of actions, observations, and decisions. So we do something, we look, we go, okay, let's see, where are we? Are we done? No. Okay, let's do some more. Okay, now are we done? Yeah. Okay. So that could be a process. And in terms of testing, I'm talking about assessing the quality of the system. So testing process would be any process we use to assess the quality of the system. Obviously, there's more to process than testing. You've also got technology and people, but we're focused here for the moment on process. Now, there are many processes in an organization, and pardon me, getting a drink of water here. Many processes in organizations, and not all of them qualify as critical testing processes by any means. And I'd say process is critical if one of four things is true of that process. One is that it's repeated very frequently, because in that case it will affect your organization's efficiency. Another critical element or element of a critical process is that it's highly cooperative, that involves a lot of people working together, because that will affect team cohesion. And again, there's a lot of efficiency implications of those, because one missed handoff can result in a lot of people having downtime. Any process that's highly visible to peers and superiors will affect your credibility, and since testing teams are sources of information, that's certainly an important consideration. And then finally, any test process that can be linked directly to project success. Your overall effectiveness is determined here. Then that's obviously critical. Anything that would make your organization more effective is something you'd want to do better. So, here we see, when I say critical testing processes, directly and significantly affecting the test team's ability to find bugs, build confidence, reduce risk, and provide valuable information and services. Those four things: finding bugs, building confidence, reducing risk, and providing valuable information and services, those are typical objectives for a testing organization. Your objectives might differ from those in some way or another, but those are fairly typical. Anything that would affect your ability to effectively and efficiently and in a satisfying way carry out your objectives is something that would be a critical testing process. So, in the critical testing processes framework, we have 12 critical testing processes, and basically, again, critical meaning we don't do these well, then the overall effectiveness and efficiency of the testing will suffer, and or key stakeholders in the testing effort, the testing process itself, will be less than satisfied. So we have testing overall. It's more of a macro view of testing. That's the higher level, the highest level process. And then there are 11 constituent processes identified in the framework, anywhere from establishing your context, which is basically figuring out how you fit into the project and the organization, and what your objectives are and what you're expected to do, how you're expected to do it. And that's establishing your context. And then risk analysis, identifying what to test, how much, and in what order. Estimation, figuring out your resources, what resources are needed, how long it will take. Planning, figuring out exactly how you're going to do your testing. Developing a test team, This has to do with not just hiring people, but also skills growth, increasing the skills and capabilities of your team. Test system development, creating your test cases, test data, test environments, and so forth. Release management, getting proper versions of the software released into your test environments. Test execution, of course, running the tests, reporting any bugs that you find during testing to developers primarily, reporting your results overall to especially or including to non-test stakeholders, people outside of testing, and even non-technical stakeholders, senior business stakeholders, and so forth, who need to understand the test results and what they mean. And then finishing up with change management. So as we proceed along in the project and make decisions about what to do next, that sometimes results in changes in scope, and that will also have a significant effect on your testing. So that's the overall framework. And if you were to look at the Critical Testing Processes book, or this new Improving the Testing Processes and Improving the Testing Process ebook, you'll see that it's structured around those areas. And then for each one of those areas, we've got things like key questions to look at and key metrics to look at, as well as outsourcing and distributed testing considerations to look at. So let's look at some of these processes in a little more depth, and including metrics and the process questions and so forth, just to kind of give you a feel for how this assessment process works. So the testing process is the overall kind of meta process within which the 11 other constituent processes live, and it's broken down into 4 main phases, I guess you could say, activities. So there's planning, figuring out what we're going to do, preparing, create the tests, create the test team, environments, etc. Performing is running the tests, and getting the software and running the tests, and then there's perfecting, reporting your findings, guiding the process, and so forth. So just a simple mnemonic to remember this is it's 4 Ps, right? Plan, prepare, perform, and perfect. Some people say, I don't know, I'm not sure about performing. Sounds like performance. It might imply that we're just a performance testing team. You can change the names. There's nothing magical about it. Just some simple way to try to remember the framework. Now, again, what are we trying to accomplish? Why does this matter? Objectives of testing. So typically, organizations want to find important bugs before they go live because that reduces costs of external failure. They are often interested in knowing about the less important bugs, the deferrable defects, so that they can, be forewarned, if you will, of those. There's also, risk reduction, figuring out what works and what doesn't. So we've got a better feel about, going into the field, what's going to happen. This relates to confidence. What level of confidence should we have? And then certainly, by no means the least, is providing management with the information they need to make smart project decisions. I think if you talk to non-testing stakeholders, people outside of testing groups and often outside of projects, this is kind of the key area, key value that they're looking for. Help me make better decisions. Okay, so if you're going to do an assessment of your test process using the CTP, or Critical Testing Processes Framework, what are you looking at? Well, as I said, questions, metrics. So from a question point of view, ask people, do you feel testing provides valuable, economical testing services? Does the test team know who their stakeholders are? Do the stakeholders feel that they're receiving these valuable and economical services? That's an important consideration, because a lot of times when we do assessments for clients, we find out that not all the stakeholders have been identified, and they're not happy. They're feeling that they don't get the services they need, and that of course undermines the value of the testing organization, and it can create political risks too. You've got detractors in the organization going, those testers, they don't do anything for me. They're pretty much worthless as far as I'm concerned. That kind of thing can't help an organization in terms of staff retention and budget and all of those happy considerations. Now, another important question is testing something that just kind of like, happens at the end and nobody does any testing except the test team, or, is it an organization at the other end of the spectrum where test team gets involved right from the start? There are testing and quality-related activities, pervasive throughout the software life cycle. Other people in the project are involved in testing, for example, business stakeholders participating in quality risk analyses, and you've got developers doing good unit testing and so forth. Is there a multi-layered plan for how quality is going to be delivered using testing throughout the life cycle as one of its elements, or is it just, we build bugs into the code and then we try like crazy to scrub them out at the end? So is testing effective? Does it achieve its objectives? Is it efficient? Does it achieve those objectives within some reasonable amount of time, level of resource? Do people understand what it's doing? Is it a organized and sort of methodical activity as opposed to something that looks chaotic and bumping around from pillar to post, as the saying goes? And is testing something that's continuously improving? Is there optimization going on? Is there continuous improvement? It's not unusual to go in and look at an organization and find that they've been sort of stuck at the same level of operational maturity for years because they don't have any sort of built-in feedback loops for continuous improvement. So what we're looking for here is that those feedback loops exist. Is testing operating at the appropriate level of formality? Now by this I say appropriate level, right? I'm not saying document everything by any means. Everything's got to be FDA audit type of standard of documentation. Indeed, that would be completely inappropriate in a number of environments. If you're in an agile environment, then there's one level of formality that applies. If you're in a FDA regulated environment, then it's something completely different. If you're in a large complex project following a waterfall model, then again something completely different. So the key here is not to be able to say, oh, here are these templates, and these templates always have to be filled in with these details to this level of specificity. No, documentation, the formality of process, all of those kinds of things should be appropriate to the needs of the organization. That's a mature testing process. Is there a clearly articulated testing strategy? Now, testing strategy is some project-independent way in which the testing is carried out. So things like reporting bugs and doing automation and writing your tests, if you write the test down, saving the tests in some sort of repository, documenting your results, reporting your results, all of these kinds of things, there should be some sort of clearly articulated strategy. And again, the point here is not, oh, he's talking about a 200-page operations manual. No, not necessarily. Whatever is sufficient for people from outside of testing to gain an understanding of what testing is doing, and people inside of testing to make sure that they understand what they're supposed to be doing. That's what I'm talking about here. Now, clearly articulated, appropriate. So, those of you familiar with the ISTQB program, you'll be familiar with things like analytical risk-based strategies, analytical requirements-based strategies, reactive strategies, methodical strategies, model-based strategies. Okay? Has the appropriate mix of those strategies been selected based on the needs of the organization? And finally, is it being actually carried out? Because this can be a problem in that the strategy could be clearly articulated and appropriate, but it could also be a complete pipe dream that nobody ever actually does it. It's just this aspirational document that people wrote down one time because they had spare time. Excuse me. Okay, and then finally, another question here. There are more than these, but I'm selecting some of the key questions for this purposes of this presentation. If there are standards and regulations that are either appropriate because they could be helpful or actually required legally, then is the testing compliant with all of those? If so, then that indicates maturity. Okay, now notice that those questions are, they're kind of yes or no questions, but they're really more open-ended kind of questions. They're intended to get people to think about, how well are we doing that? And, what can we do better there? Because in these assessments, these assessments are not about trying to hang some number off of the testing operation. And, I think that any of you read The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, you know, when you try to compress very complex things down to a single number, some amount of silliness ensues, right? This is not about saying we're going to try to put a number on you based on, yes or no answers to simple questions. It's more about we want to identify where the operation is mature and where it's immature and set the beginnings of a direction, if you will, for improvement. Operating assumption is the testing operation can always get better, and this framework will help you identify ways in which it can. Now, in addition to questions, which, it's very useful to interview people, get a lot of nuance, a lot of good information that way, but you also have the issue of subjectivity with questions. So the CTP framework includes in it a number of metrics that are suggested to evaluate how well things are doing on a more objective basis. So one of these is for the test process overall, defect detection effectiveness. I'm sure many of you have heard me or others speak about this metric, but in the case of testing at the end of the life cycle, for the last activity prior to going into a production environment, you can calculate defect detection effectiveness by taking the number of test defects and dividing it by the number of test defects plus the number of production defects. Basically, it's a measure of the percentage of bugs that you find. 1 minus the defect detection effectiveness is going to give you your defect escape rate, basically, and that's a measure of how many you miss. We're typically looking for an organization to be, average organization about 85% here. Good testing groups can score in the 90s. Very good testing groups score in the high 90s. Consistently scoring 99% or above is really the hallmark of an excellent testing organization. Now, effectiveness, good, but again, as I said before, you also want some efficiency. So what I recommend is using the cost of quality technique, and you look at the relative cost of a bug found in testing versus cost of a bug found in production, and the difference between those two, which is in many cases hundreds or thousands of dollars, that represents the savings potential offered to the organization by every bug that the test team finds. So if you multiply the number of bugs found by the test team by that difference, cost of a bug in production versus minus the cost of a bug in testing, then you often get very large numbers in terms of return on investment for testing operation. That's a measure of your efficiency. Now, to be careful with this, I wouldn't suggest that you try to optimize efficiency, because that could lead to things like, the buggier the software it is, the buggier the software is that I get, the more bugs I find at, on an hour-for-hour basis, so the better I look. You don't want to move the ball in the wrong direction. But you do want to, understand that that testing is a very efficient thing. I mean, a lot of times people think of testing as a cost center, and that's actually a savings center. If you're not familiar with cost of quality, if you go out to the RBCS basic and advanced libraries, you'll find a number of articles. Look for things like return on investment or ROI in the title. And there is even, and I think might be in the digital library or it could be in the basic or advanced library, there's even a simple spreadsheet that you can use, it's a cost of quality calculator you can download and use for free. So if you want to give that a try, go ahead. But when we do assessments, we try to run that for pretty much all of our clients, our assessment clients. Now, so we looked at the high-level sort of meta process of testing, and then within that, as I said, I break down into plan, prepare, perform, and perfect, and this shows the grouping of those. What you typically want to do, there are certain things that will apply at the meta level, if you will. You look at testing as a whole, and you can say, okay, we need to improve this or change that, what have you. But a lot of the optimization that needs to happen has to happen in each constituent testing process. So in the course of doing the assessment, you look at each of the 12 processes, testing process overall, and then each of the 11 constituent processes, and follow that same sort of course that I just laid out of, looking at questions, asking these kind of open-ended questions to gather information about the organization, as well as looking at metrics to try to take objective measurements. So let's look at some more examples. Excuse me, I'm a dried out throat here. Let me get a drink of water. So, quality risk analysis. We're going to follow a analytical risk-based testing strategy. And what we would want to do is, talk to business and technical stakeholders, discuss different problems that could arise. We're going to identify the likelihood and impact associated with each of those problems, and that's going to allow us to prioritize how much risk exists for each problem area, and thus the amount of testing that should be done, what should be tested, how much, in what order, basically. Now, there are various techniques for carrying this out, and in terms of the critical testing processes, we don't really care which one you're using, provided that they've got some sensibility about risk incorporated into your process. So we have the pragmatic risk analysis and management process, which is described in various books of mine. Managing the Testing Process, the 3rd edition describes that, for example. But you can use other techniques. You could use Prisma or any of the other techniques. I think TMAP has a risk analysis process defined for it. So we sort of independent on this, on how exactly you go about doing it. Now, you also should have some way of capturing your findings from your risk analysis, so that that's you're not just doing that analysis and going, great, okay, now I'm aware of that, I'm going to go off and test. This is a common breakdown in organizations that do risk-based testing. In fact, it's a common breakdown in any part of the strategy. The analysis piece, the determining what to test, happens according to the strategy, but then the design, implementation, and execution of the tests does not follow from the analysis. So there's a disconnect. And so, of course, that would be bad. So in quality risk analysis, we're trying to identify, what are our key risks, where do we need to focus our testing, make sure that we do focus testing on those areas. Also, because it is stakeholder involved, in fact, it's stakeholder driven, it really helps to ensure that all of the testing stakeholders really understand what is being tested and how much, and in what order, and why we're doing it that way, and what we're not testing and why we're not testing it, and so forth. So it builds a much better consensus around what testing is about. So for quality risk analysis, some of the questions that we ask, if requirements are used as an input into the analysis process, then we'll ask, well, do you get requirements in a timely fashion? Are those requirements that you receive, are they sufficiently detailed, or are they, very vague? What other concerns might people have about the requirements? Is there a quality risk analysis process that occurs, and does it happen in a timely fashion, early enough to actually influence the testing and the rest of the project? Are the right stakeholders involved in this process? Really, for quality risk analysis, it's as much about getting the right stakeholders involved as anything else. Again, level of formality. So, in a safety critical world, where you're really very, very concerned about the quality, and there's a lot of risk of injury or death if the system doesn't work properly, then you might want to have very well documented process here, and possibly even following a very formalized type of approach, like say failure mode and effect analysis. You might employ something like fault tree analysis, hazard analysis, versus in a lot of our clients that we've helped start doing risk-based testing, they're not really in typically in such high-risk environments. Some of our clients are, but many of them are not, and so they're happy to use a less formal type of approach, like the pragmatic risk analysis and management process that I mentioned, or some of the other more lightweight types of approaches. And then finally, another thing that we look at here is really kind of a metric-ish kind of question is, the risk assessment levels, are they distributed in a sort of bell-shaped normal curve, or you have a lot of clumping? We tend to see breakdowns in the risk analysis process that concern being able to actually get a good distribution on the risk ratings. Instead, you see a lot of stuff, pushed towards the high end of the scale is kind of the most common breakdown, at least in terms of impact. So we would want to, find a situation where now we got a good distribution, a good range of likelihood and impact scores. So some metrics that we would look at. If the strategy includes a risk-based element, certainly we would want to look at risk coverage. And this is just the number of covered risk elements divided by the number of identified risk elements. Now, covered in this case means tests are created to address the risk element. It might or might not mean that those tests are actually ultimately run, because in risk-based testing, that's one of the things that sometimes happens is risk-based test triage. If there's a requirements-based element to the testing strategy, we'd also look at requirements coverage, which is basically the same calculation, but looking at requirements rather than risks. And of course, a testing team can follow a blended strategy that is both risk-based and requirements-based by using the requirements specifications as an input into the risk analysis process. And in that case, would typically achieve 100% risk coverage and 100% requirements coverage. And you can make that the rule. You can say that we have to have at least one test for every identified risk item, and at least one risk item for every identified requirement. Now, this is, of course, a huge area of risk-based testing, and some of you might be going, "Oh, wow, this is really interesting. I'd like to learn more about that." I've done webinars on this, at least one, maybe more, and I lose track. So, feel free to go out to the RBCS Digital Library and poke around out there and look at recorded webinars on risk-based testing. Also, we did a year-long series of videos that we published on risk-based testing. It was a recording of a presentation I did on risk-based testing in Australia, and think it was Australia, or where was that? It was Melbourne, I think it was. So yeah, feel free to take a listen to those videos. It was like I said, it was like a 3.5 hour presentation, but it's not one big long 3.5 hour video. Though if you like it, you can buy it that way. We can sell you a DVD with that video on it. But free on the digital library, you can get little snippets of that, and it's broken down into pieces, and you can listen to into elements. When I say broken down into pieces, I mean it's broken down in some sort of intelligible way that these pieces relate to things. It's not like stopping in mid-word. Okay, so let's skip ahead to later in the testing process and look at bug reporting. So by bug reporting, I mean some people call this defect reporting. I use bug and defect the same way. Sometimes you'll hear incident report or issue report. I don't really care what you call it. I actually had somebody tell me that they renamed their bug tracking process and system and everything to track what they called apples. And I said, really? He said, yeah, because the term bug got so politicized and there was so much overwrought emotion associated with using the word bug that they just decided collectively, the entire organization, that they would just start talking about apples because nobody could possibly object to someone, quote unquote, giving someone an apple. But apparently what was happening was that developers were getting really steamed when the testers would give them a bug. In other words, report a bug against their code. So, you know, calling things by the proper name is all well and good, but there's sometimes when euphemisms are appropriate. I guess that was one of them. So when we're talking about bug reporting, we're talking about some specific way that a system does not work properly. That could be based on there's a requirement specification and it doesn't work per the requirement specification, or there's user documentation and it doesn't work per the user documentation, or there's just, you know, some standard concept of what reasonable behavior would be in a given situation, and this program does not exhibit that. So I think you want to be open to that possibility in many situations. Not in all. Certainly there are cases where when development is being done strictly to spec based on agreed upon requirement that was thoroughly vetted by both client and vendor, you know, the difference between a quote unquote bug report and a change request become very significant. So, you know, that's something that you do need to be aware of. Now, another thing that's important with bug reporting is understand who they're for. They are for developers, of course, to help them find the underlying defect and remove it. But there's some information in there that's also for managers. Some of it will be presented to them directly, like summary information, like bug summaries, managers perusing bug summary reports. There's other information that will be aggregated in things like test results dashboards, and that's something that is also of interest to managers. And so, you know, getting the data right in these things is really critical. Other testers should read each other's bug reports and be aware of what is going on, what works and what doesn't, so they don't do silly things like try to run a test case that's blocked by a known bug and then file a duplicate bug report. Two pieces of inefficiency for once. It's like you can buy one, get one free. One mistake and I get a, you know, commit one mistake and get a free mistake along with it. So it's really you know, something that you want to avoid. So testers should be familiar with each other's reports. And also technical support. If you get to the end of the project, not all the bugs have been fixed, and of course that's a very common situation, then it would be important for technical support guys to know, hey, what's working and what's not. So this is a key handoff from the test team to the project team. This is a key deliverable and certainly something that you need to take very seriously. It is certainly where a big part of the value of testing is delivered in terms of saving money on found bugs, or at least an opportunity to save money. And when done right, it builds up tester credibility with the programmers. They see this as a helpful service they're receiving rather than, oh God, here come the testers again. They're going to give me this horrible bug reports that I don't understand. Excuse me. Getting a drink of water there. Now, so questions. Has the test team identified all the audiences for the bug reports? Common mistake to make. Certainly a number of organizations that we've done assessments for have made this mistake. Don't identify all the audiences. People who need to understand the bug reports either aren't getting them, or they're getting them and the information they need is not there. So not only do we have to identify the audiences, we also have to understand what their information needs are and effectively communicate it to them. So that's something else to ask. Talk to these audience members. Hey, are you getting what you need from me? Bug report should describe one symptom. It's a mistake that occurs in some cases where a single test case reveals 4 or 5 unrelated symptoms, and those all get plopped into a single bug report. And then you get the situation where a developer fixes one of the underlying bugs, and you go and you do a confirmation test, or the tester does a confirmation test, and you find out, oh, well, one of these problems is gone, but the other 4 are still here. What do you do? I mean, you can't really reopen the report, but you kind of have to reopen the report, right? So it's kind of half fixed and half not fixed. So the best thing is to have a single symptom in there so that that symptom goes away and is replaced by correct behavior, or it is not. And if it's not, you reopen the bug report. If it does go away, then you close it. Clear distinction between debugging and testing activities so that testers are not getting pulled into the debugging process. There are some occasions where that might be appropriate, and certainly some life cycles it's seen as more appropriate than others. For example, in agile teams, that could be the case, but in many organizations it is not appropriate, and it's not a wise use of the tester's time because the testers are simply not technical enough to do it. Now, irreproducible failures. You do get intermittent problems, and just because the failure cannot be reproduced doesn't mean that it's not a problem. So it is something that needs to be handled appropriately. False positives. What level of false positives do we have? What bug reports are not related to bugs? Now, so this can happen in a couple ways. And one is it's a true false positive. Excuse me. Somebody thought something was wrong, and they reported it as wrong, and then turns out no, actually the requirements say it's supposed to work that way, so that was a mistake. The other thing that we've sometimes seen is that people are reporting things that are not bugs in the bug tracking system without any real easy way to distinguish them. So it's not unusual for some of our clients, especially those who are following an agile life cycle, to use a tool called Jira to do bug tracking. Well, it's not the world's greatest bug tracking tool, but then again, there's a lot of bug tracking that gets done in some pretty rudimentary ways. The thing that's problematic is if there's not some sort of field that's used to say, okay, what type of information are we dealing with here? Is it a defect or is it something else? Because then you can't produce any meaningful defect metrics. In fact, not most, but a large number of useful test process metrics are defect related, and if you cannot filter out, how many defects are being reported by the testing team, you're going to be at a real disadvantage in terms of doing any sort of objective measurement of the testing team's capabilities. And then finally, are all the participants and stakeholders able to use the bug tracking system to whatever degree and extent is appropriate for them, or are they having problems with it? So here are some metrics that are useful when doing an assessment on your bug reporting process. So you can do surveys. Now, people go, surveys, well, surveys is just opinions. Well, yeah, but they can actually be made objective. You can use what's called a Likert scale. So Likert scale will typically be, 1 to 5, where 1 is strongly disagree, 2 is disagree, 3 is neutral, 4 is agree, and 5 is strongly agree. So you define the Likert scale, and then you have some statements, and you have people react to these statements. So for example, identify the report audiences, the bug report audiences, send the survey out. One of the statements would be, bug reports are well written. Okay, are they well written? Or are they really poorly written and hard to figure out, right? Well, people react to that, well written. You would like that, you'd like that everybody strongly agree. Now, you might not get that, but certainly you'd want the average score to be somewhere, like a 4.5, somewhere between agree and strongly disagree, or agree and strongly agree. And certainly you'd want to look at if there are any people who are, reporting 1s and 2s or saying, no, I disagree with that or strongly disagree with that. You'd want to investigate why would that happen. And the same for the next statement here. Bug reports include the information I need. When somebody gets a bug report, if it doesn't have the information they need, whoops, what are they going to do? They got to send an email, they got to go track someone down, and it's inefficient. So those are survey metrics. We actually have a fair number of those included in our framework. Then we have the rejected bug reports metric here. We take the number of rejected bug reports divided by the total number of bug reports. Now, by rejected here, I mean that the bug report was invalid, and it was a false positive. So this is a metric to go along with what I was talking about before. It wasn't an actual problem. Now, there's also the reopened bug reports. This is another, I think, very helpful metric, one that we should try to gather as test professionals. And this is the number of times that a bug report fails the confirmation test, basically, or number of bug reports that fail the confirmation test more accurately. You divide that by the number of total number of open. I see we have a typo here. It shouldn't say number of reopened reports down here. Let me get a highlighter here. Excuse me. This should say number of opened bug reports, or just number of bug reports. Obviously, the number of reopened bug reports divided by the number of reopened bug reports will be 1, but that should be number of reopened bug reports divided by the total number of bug reports. Now, for both of the reopens and for the rejects, you want these numbers to be like 5% or less. I mean, the reopens, some number of fixes are not going to fix the underlying problem. That's just the way it is, and there's nothing really you can do about that. But if it gets to be like 20, 30, 40% of the time, it's clearly something's wrong. Something is wrong. People are not getting the information they need. They don't have the time they need. Something's broken in the bug fix process. And the same with the rejected bug reports. If it's up from like 20, 30%, you got a tremendous amount of inefficiency there, and there's definitely a significant process problem that needs to be addressed and resolved. Pardon me. Whoops. Okay, conclusions. So we looked at some selected processes just to kind of give you a feel for this framework and how it works. This will allow this framework will allow you to do a very thorough assessment. You look at testing participants and project participants, project and product stakeholders, and you manage to gather up their opinions through questions, which are, in a sense, yes and no questions, but they have an open-ended component that really allows you to gather a lot of rich detail. And then you have the metrics that will corroborate those opinions or not. We've seen that happen too, where we've done assessments. You look at the metrics and it's like, oh, everybody thinks that the reason this happens is because of X, but actually that doesn't fit at all. I had a situation where we saw there was a very large percentage of rejected bug reports, and people in the assessment said, oh, yeah, I know why that's happening. That's happening because the testers don't have sufficient real-world experience with using the product in a production environment. It sounded like a reasonable assertion. I mean, this was an industrial control system, and you'd think, yeah, it's going to be pretty complicated. But it turned out there was absolutely no statistical correlation between the number of years of production use experience and the percentage of defect reports that were being rejected for a given individual. So facts are good. Metrics are good. So the framework looks at testing activities throughout the life cycle from beginning to end, and is going to allow you to identify, as I put it here, value-focused improvements. So now when I say, what do I mean by saying value-focused improvements? What I'm pointing out there is, since we've got metrics, we can actually measure our levels of effectiveness and efficiency or lack thereof, and so the metrics will allow you to develop an actual business case where you can say, look, if we fix this, this is going to save us this amount of money. And this is, I think, a very important thing in test process improvement, that testing is something that is seen in a lot of organizations kind of a necessary evil. Yeah, we got to do it, we got to spend money on it, but we don't like that. If you just talk about something arbitrary like a maturity number, we want to go up from X to Y, how does that relate to anything the organization cares about? There's really not much of a value proposition there, and it's going to be very difficult to get funding for that. What I always say, organizations and clients talk about, what motivates change. Well, what motivates change is typically pain, and this is actually this is a rule of sales. Not that I'm an expert salesman, but I do know a little bit about it, running my own business. And the rule is that people move away from pain a lot faster than they move towards a desirable situation. So, if you want to motivate somebody in your organization, some executive, to invest, say, $100,000, $200,000 in some process improvement effort, then saying we're going to move up 2 points on the TPI next, or TPI maturity model scale, or TMMI maturity model scale, that's not really going to be very compelling to the average executive. But if you say, here's a process change, we're going to implement this, it's going to cost us $200,000, and by the end of the year, we estimate that we will save $1 million for this, and we will be able to measure our savings as we go. Now you actually have a business case. So that's what I'm saying with value-focused improvements. So, and I think that's an important thing. As I said, you see a lot of organizations that have a lot of difficulty implementing process improvements because there's not a clear connection to business value. So that's one of the things that I try to do with this framework, and you'll see that if you pick up the ebook and take a look at how the framework works. Okay, so as usual, we'll take some questions. So again, quick reminder, we are going to, if you have PMP certification, you are going to earn PDUs on this. You will get a reminder, an attendee letter to back that up. And also, if you enjoyed today's webinar, you want to read the ebook, it is published. It's available in the ebook section of our store, and more specifically, you can find it. There's a Mobi, which is the Amazon format version, and the EPUB version is available there, and it's on the ebook high-level page. You'll be able to find that quite easily if you'd like. So let me undock the question panel here. Give me just a moment as I kind of deal with the interface. Let's see. Somebody asked, will I get a mail to claim PDUs? Yes. Peter makes a comment. Sound keeps fading in and out. I only saw this comment once, so I'm assuming that was a transient thing. And yes, I had gotten some notice that there was something weird afoot, that it did appear to clear up. Laura asks, we have access to this presentation offline after the webinar. Yes, it is available for free download if you go to the rbcs-us.com. upper middle part of the page, there's a resource selection. If you click on that, you'll see that library is one of the options. If you go to the basic library, this should be posted in PDF format all the way at the bottom. So you should be able to get that there, Laura. Okay, Owen asked an interesting question about DDE. Let's go back and take a look at DDE here. He says, oops, I think I shot right past it in my enthusiasm to answer Owen's question. So DDE, here it is. So he says, Owen does the DDE take into account the severity of the bugs found, or is a severity 1 bug the same as a severity 4 bug in this formula? Well, in the formula you see here, yes, it is the same. Now, what many of our clients do is actually run this metric twice, once for all test defects, get their overall DDE, and then once filtered to show only, or to include only the high severity defects. However, they define that severity 1 and 2 or severity 1 only. And what you would like to see there is that the DDE for the high severity defects, the more critical defects, should actually be higher than the DDE overall. So you'll have two different standards basically. You might say that 90%, your target is 90% DDE overall, but a 95% DDE for critical bugs. So great question, Owen. Thanks for asking it. Guy asked a question. He said, I entered late. How do I find the first few slides that I missed? As I said, you can download this off of the website, the soft copy. Also, this is being recorded and will be posted. So you can listen to the recorded version of this webinar too. Okay, my longtime friend Rich, back again. Good to see you again, Rich. Hope you are doing well. So he says, when testers have a test and evaluation engineering mindset, they would view improving the testing process as an expansive way. That is, defect tools provide a service for software analysis and software suggestions, and not just software defects. Do these improve, suggest additions, effectively value-add test metrics, or introduce more confusion? Well, let's see. So we're talking about including stuff that's more like, we think that the product should do this, we think the product should do that. I mean, I don't think there's any harm in that, especially if the organization has, the test organization has the respect of its peers, which is gained, or really better yet, earned, better way to put it. Then yeah, I think that's fine. What I would say though is that from a point of view of metrics, if you have metrics that are focused on defects proper, then again, you know, as with that discussion earlier about the change request versus defect, you need to have some way of filtering. You need to have some way of removing the non-defect reports. But as far as, you know, in encouraging the active participation of well-respected test professionals in the betterment of the product, yeah, sure, that's definitely all to the good. Just a matter of setting it up in such a way that, you know, the metrics stay clean. And, you know, we're working with a client right now, so where I am at this very moment, to try to help them improve their metrics. Carlos asks, is there a PDF or spreadsheet at the library about this framework? Well, there's the presentation, this presentation, and again, it's recorded. And then there's the ebook and the critical testing processes book. Eventually, we'll probably have like a supporting spreadsheet for the metrics and so forth that'll be out there, but it's not out there quite yet. If anybody wants to go through the ebook and put together a spreadsheet for all of the metrics and questions in it, I'd be happy to post it on our website with for free download on the digital library, with credit to whoever assembles said artifact. Mercedes asks, name a book. Oh, yeah, good question. I mentioned it beginning, but not since then. The book is called Improving the Testing Process, a Value-Based Approach to Assessing and Enhancing Testing Maturity. And again, you find that on our e-store, on our website. The book that spelled out the original framework, if you want the gory details, as it were, is called Critical Testing Processes. And that's good 450 pages or something. This ebook is much shorter than that. It's like 100 pages, more about just applying the framework to do an assessment rather than critical testing processes, which was really explaining the philosophy behind the assessment. Let's see, Dwight, longtime webinar listener. Dwight, good to see you back. Capers-Jones recommends tracking bugs removed during static testing. I found that requirements and design analysts are very sensitive about the terms bugs or defects, especially when the document review is covering a document that is still in draft or in progress. Yet, removing a bug during static testing is very positive. How can we change the context to promote a more positive connotation? Woof, that's a good one. Yeah, this is a real challenge, Dwight. I mean, one of the things that happens is that sensitivity comes from somewhere. Now, sometimes it's just personality. Some people are just, they don't like to have their work criticized, and they tend to naturally go on the defensive. But sometimes this is a learned behavior when people in an organization have been negatively incentivized, if you will, punished, in other words, for having defects reported against their work products. And so you got to understand partially why the defensive response. Why are people feeling this way? I think that's part of making this more positive. Another thing is, just to your point, Dwight, I mean, identify the business case, right? We found in a situation with an organization about a year and a half ago where they had anywhere from $100 million to $250 million in excess costs of failure based on a cost quality model. And that's on $1 billion annual IT budget. So, it's big money. It's 10 to 25%. And a lot of that, we couldn't tell exactly how much because the data was really fuzzy, but a lot of that was because the lot of defects ended up escaping out of requirements and design into later stages, being found in testing, being found in production, and it was very expensive. So, one of the things we did was work with them to come up with a business case for getting better about removing bugs, especially earlier. And it changes the mindset when you see, hey, look at all the money we could save. But it's a process. It's not. It's definitely not you just go in and go, hey, here's a business case for saving 5% of our annual IT budget, and all of a sudden everybody's going to change behavior. There's definitely a process. Let's see. Ken asks, where do I get more information on PRAM? That's the Pragmatic Risk Analysis and Management Process. So a couple places. One is you can go out to our digital library and you can view, as I said, I think there's a webinar out there on at least one. There might be two on risk-based testing, so listen to those. There's also, as I said, about 3 hour long or three hours of total video broken up into digestible bits that can give you a good explanation on PRAM. On the basic and advanced libraries, also on the website there, or if you go to the quality risk analysis sections of those, there are various templates that you can download and look at as examples of how this process works. And then finally, in my book, Managing the Testing Process, third edition, has a description of how PRAM works as well. If you have a copy of Pragmatic Software Testing, and you can find it there. We are working, by the way, on getting all of my books available in ebook format to be available on our store. So if you want to have all in one place, then you'll be able to do it. Marcos asks, when we started a test project from start, even without a team and tools, we must first set up the process. Well, there are different ways of looking at this, Marcos. I mean, some people would say, yep, absolutely. You know, you got to start with having a well-defined test policy that sets out your objectives, and then you define your strategy, which is going to spell out your process, your whole test process, and only then do you actually commit to starting a project and testing. Yeah, you know, that's sort of the Genesis eye view, right, of you know, God creating the world in 6 days. In my experience, most testing organizations, they evolve over time, and the original focus is just do something of value, and then start to optimize. Now, you know, okay, you could say, well, that's not really great. You should start, you know, with start the right way, and yeah, there's definitely truth in that. But can you take an organization that's been around for a year or two and was started off just with this philosophy of, well, let's just start doing some valuable testing work and we'll worry about getting it better, making it better later? Yeah, I mean, a lot of our clients are exactly that way. That they, you know, the testing group got started, and often in response to a particular incident, some sort of quality debacle in production is a common story here. And you know, you can certainly take those organizations and then gradually mature their processes over time, and that's fine. Excuse me. I have a comment from Rama. Excuse me. Organizations are shifting from traditional testing to Agile. How does this help? Well, it helps and it hurts. I mean, it's got its opportunities and its challenges. What I would recommend, Rama, rather than try to address what's a huge topic here in 2 minutes, I have 2 recorded webinars, Agile Testing Opportunities and Agile Testing Challenges, available on the digital library. You can go take a listen to those. I'm actually going to do an updated presentation of the Agile Testing Challenges webinar here in, I forget when, sometime in the next 3 or 4 months, I think. So, you know, tune in for that if you want to ask questions. It's, as I said, they have, Agile has things that help testing, and it has things that make testing a little more challenging. Adam asks, we are underway to implementing business users in QA testing. Could you speak to the effects of integrating non-QA testers into QA process? Certainly, Adam. I think the key word here that you used is integrating. So that's good. That means to me, sounds to me, Adam, you can confirm or deny this if necessary, but sounds to me like these people will be working within a process defined by the QA team, with the QA team available to help, and with the aid required. I mean, the thing with non-test people doing testing is that they're not professional testers, and that sounds like, okay, duh, tell me something I don't know. But the thing is that people don't tend to understand what goes into being a professional tester. And so just simple stuff like business analysts generally don't know how to write very good bug reports, nor are they particularly interested in learning how to do it, because that's not their job. And you're really sort of better off training a business analyst to write good requirements than worrying about teaching them how to write great bug reports, because that's kind of like the mirror of the process, right? If you got bad requirement, it turns into ultimately a bug report. Well, it'd be better for the BAs to focus on fewer bug reports, right? So things like having the testers assist the BAs with writing better bug reports is something that you need to look at. You just need to look at what do people know and what don't they know, and so what can they do. I mean, BAs and business users, they tend to have very good insight into what the system does, and can be very effective doing things like exploratory testing of the system, especially complex parts. But other things they don't tend to have expertise at. So, for example, like I probably would not use a business user to, if I were in a regulated environment, to write test cases that were going to be subject to audit. I'd want to have a professional tester doing that, perhaps with the help of a business user. So I hope that's useful. Let's see. If a guy, Ruari, asks, is the presentation in the digital library? Yes, it will be. It's being recorded. This is being recorded, and it will be posted. Let's see. Naveen asks, relative to DDE, would the defect postponed to the next release be considered in the test defect counts? Well, again, let's go back and look at this. The DDE metric here. So it's kind of an interesting thing. I mean, I would typically count it here, yes, because it was a defect that was found. Now, the fact that it was deferred would indicate it was relatively low priority, which would bring us back to the point that was raised earlier about you would run this metric once for the more important defects, and then again, or once for the more important defects and once for all. So that would probably, the deferred defect would probably get included in the all rather than the more important ones. Now, the interesting thing that comes up here, Naveen, is what if a defect is found in testing and it's deferred and then it's reported in production? It's a duplicate, right? The test count gets the credit for it because it found it first. So if you have a lot of that happening, a lot of defects are deferred and then they pop up in production, you need to make sure that the test team's getting the credit for it rather than getting dinged for it by having it included here. Let's see, Kathy asks, should the risk analysis be provided as part of the requirements, or is the risk analysis the responsibility of the testers after receiving the requirements? Okay, so this comes up a lot when I'm helping clients get started doing risk-based testing. It's like, well, why are we, the testers, doing this as opposed to other people? Well, yeah, I suppose in a perfect world, the project manager or product owner or someone like that would be responsible for all the risks that exist that affect the project or the product or both, and they would drive this process. But in my experience, they don't. They don't know how to. They aren't particularly interested in it. They don't necessarily, they'll invest the time to participate in the risk identification and assessment sessions, but they will not invest the time to drive it. It's not where their pain is. It is, though, where the tester's pain is. Because if we test the wrong things, because we have no way of knowing what the right things are without a risk analysis, then, that reflects badly on us. So, this is why I think typically we see and we recommend with our clients that they actually, that the testers be the ones that drive this. So Mary asks, finding defects is a purpose of testing, but developers often take defect finding as a personal affront. How can a testing team provide an accurate count of DDE if the developers fix defects and argue against bug creation? Well, again, I mean, you have to ask why the defensiveness, right? If the reason for the defensiveness is that the developers are getting dinged, they're getting negative reinforcement, punishment of some sort associated with defect reports, well, yeah, you bet they're going to push back on this, and it politicizes the process. Anytime you've got process metrics, which are measurements of process capability, first and foremost, this must be kept in mind. They are not measurements of individual or personal capability. Process capability metrics. Anytime you have these process metrics that are being used to give individual rewards and punishments, they are going to get skewed. So if that's what's happening, then the behavior is obvious. Now let's say that's not what's happening. It's just a matter of personal pride or something. I mean, the important thing here is to make sure that management understands if we want to understand the quality capabilities of our software engineering process, we must manage and measure defects. There's just no two ways about that. If you don't have measurement of this stuff, of your process and of defects, you can't understand what your quality capabilities are. I mean, I've heard assertions about, well, you know, this results in higher quality, that results in higher quality. And many times those assertions are not backed up by data. And so it's just, you know, it's just wind in sails, right? Nothing is proven. So if you want to make smart process improvement decisions, you want to understand the process, the quality capability of your current software engineering process, then you got to measure the bugs. And, you know, people have to make sure, management and individuals, that nothing is getting in the way of that. There are no perverse incentives to measure the bugs. Let's see. Some organizations, Srini asked, some organizations don't have time to do all this. So you say do all this, I assume you mean assess their testing process. How can we convince them? Well, once again, I'll go back to pain here. Most organizational change is the result of, well, a lot. Okay, I'm going to try to put a number on this, but a significant amount of the organizational change, especially organizational change that I see in testing groups, is driven by pain. Something hurts. There's loss of money. There's late delivery. There's something that is widely perceived as bad, and there is strong motivation to make that bad go away. And in that case, then you know, people will be motivated to do it. But as long as everybody's sitting around going, hey, this is great, you know, you can come along and say, look, I can figure out ways to do things better, and then the reaction is likely to be, better? We don't need better. This is fine. So, you know, it's a matter of identifying some pain and making sure that it gets addressed. Okay, so Linda asks, and again, thank you, Linda, for your PMI review. What is your opinion of a risk-based testing process that is defined by moving more testing to development with testers in a role of reviewing development testing? Well, I'm all for early detection and removal of defects and detection and removal of defects throughout the life cycle. So I think that's great. And certainly you could use a risk analysis to actually inform throughout the life cycle where you're going to try to basically engineer risk out of the system as well as try to test risk out of the system. So I think it's fine. I do think it's important, though, that this be done in the context of measurement so that you can actually say, yes, indeed, this is better. This is resulting in better quality, because, you know, otherwise you have sort of this, without measurement, you have the potential in these kind of situations for, you know, opinions and personal preferences, like, oh, yeah, I like this new way better, or I don't like it. And, well, okay, that's fine. That's an opinion, but, you know, what's its capability? Now Maria asks, how can we track reopened defects if the tracking tool does not track history of statuses unless you open every single defect and look at the details? Even if I create separate status and name it reopen when the defect is tested and closed, it cannot be tracked. You mentioned a tool here, QuickBase. I don't know, but yeah, I mean, you need, in order to have reopened metrics, which are extremely useful, you need to have some ability of flagging whether a defect report was ever in a reopened state. Now, one way that I've seen done with this, very lightweight but effective way, is you have a field called opened count. When the bug is first opened, the opened count is set to 1. Anytime the bug is reopened, the opened count is incremented. And that way you have metrics about not only, you know, which bugs were reopened, but you can actually say how many times they were reopened and really quantify the inefficiency of it. It sounds like you'd have to tweak your bug tracking system in some way. Let's see, Adam asks, is there a schedule available for all upcoming webinars? I'm not sure if we've got them all posted now, I thought we did. I thought that they are, you can find them on the front page of our website, rbcs-us.com. If you don't find it there, Adam, please send an email. The address is info, I-N-F-O, at rbcs-us.com, and ask where that calendar is, and if it goes through the end of the year, because we do have now, I have put together my schedule of webinars through the end of the year. Now, I do want to mention something here since you brought it up. The dates can change. They can move around by a week in one direction or another typically. Now, that we try extremely hard never to do that in the case of a webinar that is happening in a month or less. So, you know, that's something that we really don't want to do. But ones that are more than a month out, certain time client demand can mean, hey, you know, we've got to move that. So you will get a notification if you register for one and then it does change. Apologies in advance if that results in you not being able to attend. We do everything we can to avoid it, but since these webinars are free and since you know, our clients have demands and our clients' needs obviously have to come first, it does sometimes happen. Let's see. So Laura asks a follow-up to something that was brought up earlier regarding non-QA people in the test team. I think that's what it is. In this context, should all organizations have a non-QA team to test business users? Okay, so broadly speaking, is there a need to include non-QA people in testing? Yes, absolutely. So of course the developers need to unit test their code. They have the technology expertise that's necessary to do that effectively and efficiently, so they should. For things like acceptance testing and for system testing or system integration testing that involves expertise, you know, strong expertise, the business domain, the application domain, you know, that definitely include users in that. I mean, I think, you know, again, this is this idea of pervasive testing, that all participants are involved in testing to the extent to which it makes sense. Let's see. Richard asks, what is the difference between the DDE and DDP metrics? There isn't one. I mean, it's variously known as defect detection effectiveness or defect detection percentage. They refer to the same thing. James says, I'm looking through the RBCS libraries and I can't find the cost of quality calculator that you mentioned. Pretty sure is in the digital library. I think it's towards the top. So, you know, take a look there. It might be near the article that talks about cost of quality, though. So you might have to kind of poke around for it. Apologies for the lack of really clear organization of those libraries, but I would say in their defense, they're free resources. So, you know, it's kind of they won't cost you nothing but your time to use. Let's see. So Erlene asks, is it okay to recommend to a requirements analyst to reconsider how a comment field will be an unlimited number of characters in a page? I would like to recommend a fixed length of maximum characters instead of unlimited in order to save the potential paralysis of the website for those who maliciously input too many characters. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, there is a limit. The only issue is whether the limit's going to be defined by the requirements analyst or it will be imposed in the form of a bug, and as you mentioned, potentially a security or performance bug by the limitations of the system. So yeah, now there's a nice way of saying that, of course, Erlene, and it's nicer than the blunt way that I just put it, and I'd encourage you to be nice. You seem like a perfectly nice person based on your question. So yeah, try to be nice, try to be respectful, but, you know, point out that not defining a limit doesn't mean that there is no limit. There definitely is a limit You know, there's a technical limit at which point the system will fail, and there's probably a limit much below that, at which point, beyond which point, nobody really needs to go, and that's what the requirements should look at. Let's see. James asks, I work in an agile environment, and we take the risk analysis into the iteration planning meetings to persuade developers to develop high-risk features earlier. Excellent. Most excellent. I think that's a very good practice, and I'm happy to hear your report of how you're using risk-based testing in an agile environment, James. I mean, we have sometimes we talk about risk-based testing. People are like, oh, that won't work for us. We're doing agile. I'm like, God, what are you talking about? We've had a bunch of clients that are using it in agile or agile style life cycles, and it works great. It's very well attuned to the concept of agile. You know, you're just saying, hey, let's think about risk, you know, and think about how that affects what we should test and so forth. It's a perfect fit in an agile world. Let's see. Adam says, thanks to you and your staff for providing this service. You are quite welcome. Thank you for attending. Hope to see you on the future ones. Let's see. Sillard from Budapest. Nice to hear you again. How do you see combining risk-based testing with requirements-based testing, mainly to prioritize use cases, in what order to cover them during testing? No, actually, I've seen that approach used, and I know that's an approach that's described in one or two books on risk-based testing, but I wouldn't actually call that risk-based testing. I'd call that risk-weighted requirements-based testing. To me, proper risk-based testing combined with requirements-based testing, you do an open-ended risk analysis first with the stakeholders, and not referring to the requirements, but just thinking about what people know about the product. And then you go back and you look at the risks that you identified and cross-reference those against use cases and requirements and so forth, and see, okay, is there anything that we missed? And if so, you add risks based on that. And that way you're sure that you got at least one risk for every use case and or requirement, but you don't bias the process. Because the thing is that if people proceed to do the risk analysis based on a requirement specification, it's very unusual for them to color outside the line. So usually only identify risks that relate to specific requirements, and then you don't find any gaps in the requirements that way. Let's see. So Amit asks, after migrating to an agile approach, most critical bugs found by testers aren't documented, but instead are verbally communicated to the developers. This presents a problem for tracking defects. Yes, it does. What is your opinion on defect detection metrics in an agile environment? If defects are not tracked, you cannot measure them, and you will not have metrics, and you will not understand the quality capability of your software engineering process. It's just that simple. Now, a lot of times I think people hear me say that, they go, oh, geez, that's not agile. You're going to have a bunch of heavyweight stuff. No, it doesn't have to be heavyweight. All you have to do is track enough information to be able to calculate the metric. So, if you're saying, well, we don't need to document the steps to reproduce in an agile environment, we'll just show the developer, hey, show me where in the DDE that you have to actually have the steps to reproduce documented anywhere. All I need to know is numbers and severities. So this is the kind of stuff that can be tracked very simply in a very lightweight way. If it's not tracked, then you don't have measures. And if you don't have measures, and to paraphrase Lord Kelvin, your knowledge is of a very meager and inadequate sort. Let's see. James says, I love the libraries. Hey, thanks. Good. Glad to provide that. A number of people saying thank you. Erline, for example, you're quite welcome. Carlos says thank you and asks, how long will it take to be in the page to download it, to review it later? The digital version is usually posted within a week or less. Let's put it that way. Let's see. Can your videos and webinars in the digital library be viewed on an iPad? Well, Maybe not. They might or might not on the digital library. It depends on how that works. But I'll tell you how you could view them. Those videos are also posted to YouTube. So if you go to our YouTube channel, you'll be able to view them, I'm pretty sure, on an iPad. See, Chris says, this was, thanks, was my first time and well worthwhile. Off to another meeting. Thanks, Chris. Enjoy it. We had a few other questions that I wasn't able to get to. Sorry for that. We are out of time. If you want to send those questions into me via email, info@rbcs-us.com, I will be happy to try to get to those in my blog. I have to apologize that I am very backed up on work right now. So to close, a few more things to mention, are resources available. Free webinars once a month. As many of you know, please check our website, rbcs-us.com, to sign up. If you want a special webinar presentation for your company only of this webinar or any other topic, info@rbcs-us.com, or contact us via our website. Sign up for our free newsletter. We're working on one right now. You can sign up again at rbcs-us.com. You get valuable discounts on consulting and training services and a regular newsletter, which includes a featured article about us and our partners, what we're up to. You can follow us on Twitter at twitter.com/rbcs, and we're also on Facebook at rbcs-inc. Do remember to check your email over the next couple days. You might be the lucky winner of our free e-learning. Check out the blog, rbcs-us.com/blog. I am a bit backed up on that, but I will eventually get unbacked up, and so feel free to send stuff in, and eventually I'll get to it. You check out the digital library. That's on. It's got the recordings of these webinars and podcasts and videos. Podcasts are available via iTunes by entering RBCS Podcast. And by the way, if you're using something other than iTunes as your podcast reader feed, and you want us to support that, send an email to info@rbcs-us.com, like if you're using Zune, for example, and we'll figure out what we can do. And as I said, you can subscribe to the RBCS channel on YouTube as well. We offer these free resources as a service to the software testing community because at RBCS we are a not-just-for-profit company. This concludes the webinar. Thanks to everyone for joining us today. I look forward to seeing you on future webinars.